ladies and gentlemen, one private investigator to another, Mr. Greg Kading. How you doing, sir?
Good morning. How are you? I'm great over here in California. It's about 80 degrees out.
It's 30 to 40 degrees right now. Now, real fast, we talked over the phone. You told me you was took a visit to Alabama. What was that like?
Yeah, I was out there with my wife and drove through. We actually stayed in Birmingham and stayed in Gadsden and just drove around looking at some property and just getting to know, becoming familiar with it. And what a great state. The people are outwardly friendly and they go out of their way to be kind. And I really loved it, man. You got a good state there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's funny because when I was over the phone, I told you Gadsden. There's some cities that are just we consider dangerous. Gadsden's one of them. Pritchard, Alabama, Montgomery, Birmingham, etc. You know, the first time I ever seen somebody shoot up in their arm was in Gadsden, Alabama. But then I forget that you're from. You worked in Compton, so what I compare is dangerous. You have seen like probably 10 times worse.
Yeah, I didn't feel it out there, man. I just thought it was, the town was good and the people were great. And I maybe avoided some of the areas that you're talking about, but it's a far cry from, South Central LA and the areas that I worked. You really have to pay attention to your surroundings there. But I didn't feel that when I was in Alabama at any time. So you should be proud of your state, man. It's good people.
Oh, I'm very proud of my state. I love Alabama. There's some things you can fix in Alabama, but all in all, the people are good. And, you got that Southern hospitality and all. Was it weird when people went up to you? I know you're someone people know in the public. Was it weird when people just went up to you and just say hello, just to say hello? Because I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, they're just don't feel guilty about it. Be proud of that, when you go out of your way to be kind, and that's what the people do there. And it's not like they see me as just a 57-year-old white dude walking down the street, and it's not like anybody, there's no notoriety there, but they're just kind to everybody. It wouldn't matter if you're a known person or not. They're going to be kind just because that's how they roll.
Don't do that in New York. Don't just go up to people because I'll walk. I'm the type of person, if I walk past you, I'm going to say hello. That's just my nature. But go to somewhere like New York City. No, don't just, hey, how you doing? No, they don't like that. Don't do it. Murder Rap, the documentary. I highly recommend you check that documentary out. He also wrote a book called Murder Rap. With that said, take us back to 1994 to 97 and all the things that led up to the Notorious B.I.G. murder.
Well, you had Tupac getting shot at the Quad Studios in 94. And at the time, he wasn't sure exactly, he felt like he had been set up. He walked into a trap. He ended up getting pistol whipped pretty severely and shot himself while he was trying to get his own gun out of his waistband. And of course, that led to a misunderstanding where he thought that maybe Puffy and Biggie and some of the people at Bad Boy had set that up. Turned out not to be the case. And I think he came to realize that wasn't the case later, but it started that kind of rift. And then, of course, he's got the rape case that he goes to jail for. And Suge Knight goes and kind of rescues him, brings him to Los Angeles. And then, he starts to make history with Death Row Records. Well, there's this, ongoing beef that's happening between Puffy Combs and Bad Boy and Suge and Death Row, where they're just kind of going back and forth at each other until 95, when Suge's bodyguard gets shot and killed by one of Puffy's bodyguards in Atlanta outside of a nightclub. And of course, now there's blood on the ground. Now there's somebody's actually dead. And that just increases the hostility between the crews. So, ultimately Suge's surrounded with a bunch of mobsters. They're called Mob Piru, gangsters, blood gang members from Compton. Puffy then, in order to kind of provide a layer of security, hires Southside Crips, who are the natural enemies of those blood gang members. And those become part of his kind of crew or entourage whenever he's in Los Angeles doing, video shoots. And so now you've got gang members involved in all this. And of course, one of the guys that's affiliated with Bad Boy, a guy named Orlando Anderson, is attacked and beat down along with, with Tupac Shakur out in Las Vegas. Orlando Anderson's at the MGM. Tupac runs over, slugs him in the face, and then the rest of the mob Pyrus start to stomp Orlando. Well, he's going to get himself payback. So later that night, Orlando and his uncle and two other guys go and they hunt down Tupac and Suge, shoot and kill Tupac. And then, of course, in retaliation of that, Suge hires a gang member to go and kill Biggie.
And it's funny to me because when he got shot, when Tupac got shot, and we all saw Orlando Anderson, everybody with common sense knew Orlando Anderson was the murderer. Somehow, some way, we all knew it. As a kid, I even was watching an interview he did, and I saw the little smirk on his face. And it was like, I know something's up with this kid. Why couldn't LA get enough proof? When I say, Las Vegas. Why, in your professional opinion, why couldn't Las Vegas get that proof to lock him up?
Because that requires witnesses, and the witnesses are gang members, and the gang members don't cooperate with law enforcement. So your witnesses aren't telling you what they knew, what they know or saw or did. They're going to handle that stuff on the streets, which is what they did, which is why the war started in Compton the very next day after Tupac was shot, and the Bloods and the Crips started to, go to war over this whole thing. But, it's nobody's walking to the police station and saying, hey, I was in the car, Orlando shot, killed Tupac. That's just not happening in these gang-related murders. People don't cooperate, and you don't get the information you need to prosecute them.
So that makes me to a question. People like to say, if this was Jerry Seinfeld, if he was murdered on the strip, someone would be in jail the next day. The fact is, no one talked. Matter of fact, Tupac told the cops when he got shot, the cop looked down at Tupac and said, do you know who shot you? And the exact words were, how frustrating as a law enforcement officer when you got the public looking down at you saying, why can't you solve this case? But when you're doing everything you can to solve the case, nobody's helping. No one's talking. How frustrating as a law enforcement officer is that?
Well, obviously it's frustrating because you really want to solve your cases. That's the whole, the whole objective. So it's your role. And when you can't do it because people don't cooperate, it's frustrating, but it's also pathetic. It's pathetic that people didn't care enough about the guy that they claimed to be his friend. They wanted to handle it on the streets and deal with it differently. But, solving the case in the way that we, defined solving a case isn't on the top of their priority list. They're just going to go retaliate and handle things. So it's unfortunate for the parents, the friends, and the fans of these guys that they don't have any closure because a bunch of assholes didn't do the right thing.
Speaking of frustration, how frustrated is it for you to do this investigation with Officer Dupree or Detective Dupree? Am I correct? Detective Dupree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other people in the task force who y'all didn't just wake up in the morning and just drink coffee for 6 hours. I mean, y'all put your heart and soul into this investigation. How frustrating was it to do this task force and not get one conviction?
Well, it was bittersweet because we know what happened, which, that was the whole objective, was to find out the truth behind what happened. So we had that sense of accomplishment, but not being able to prosecute. So much time had gone by. So many people were already dead. It became a little bit impractical. It's bittersweet because, we always say in law enforcement, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And if you can't take it to court and prove it, then you're only coming up, your glass is half empty. And so that's just the way it is. That's going to happen. You're not going to solve every one.
It makes me think, you not only did you put your heart and soul in this case, the people from your task force put their heart and soul into this case, but Russell Poole,
mm-hmm.
He put his heart and soul into this case. People know what happened to Russell Poole, family problems, alcoholism. Was there any sympathy there for his outcome, with his untimely death and everything that's happened to him in his life?
Yeah, of course. There's empathy. You know, I do feel for. Of course, he's got a son that lost his dad. A couple sons, I guess, that lost their dad. And even though he is divorced, I'm sure his ex-wife, you know, suffered through the problems that he encountered, and ultimately what the outcome of his life. Yeah, so there's empathy, but at the same time, you know, you've got to also hold people accountable and responsible for the decisions they make. And he did, you know, he went in hard on the case. He worked on it for about 9 months. And then after he was off the case, continued to be interested in pursuing his theory. But unfortunately, he was wrong. And he put all his eggs in one basket, and he couldn't recover from that. He couldn't recover from the fact that he promoted a false idea and then changed that idea ultimately and began with a new theory that took him down another rabbit hole, which stressed him out to the point where he had a massive heart attack while he was talking about the case with other investigators.
I think the new theory he had before he passed away was Reggie White being involved. Am I correct?
As far as Tupac's murder, believing, yeah, Reggie, and then Suge's ex-wife, Sharitha, and then the attorney, David Kenner. It was this very convoluted theory that he was pushing that was all built on this so-called confession letter by a schizophrenic child molester and who was in prison. So, you know, he just lost his objectivity and I think really, really wanted to solve these cases, but he was just traveling down the wrong road.
Right. And, you know, the more I did when I was researching this interview, the more I researched Russell Poole, you know, first off, my first question is during the show, you and Detective Dupree had a face-to-face meeting with Russell Poole. Did that really happen?
No, that was all just artistic or creative liberties that was being taken by the producers of the show. They were aware of the fact that me and Russell Poole never actually had a face-to-face meeting. I pursued a meeting with him. I tried to ask people, intermediaries, you know, hey, you know, try to figure out a way. I want to sit down with Russ. I want to talk about what we've discovered in our investigation and deal with some of the problems with his theory. But he declined that. He didn't want to meet with me and have a conversation. So him and I have never met.
Last question about Russell Poole. What was your opinion on as a detective, as a cop? Because to me, as a man, when I believe strongly, because he wanted justice for these two young men. And no matter how you want to look at Tupac and Biggie, I was a child when Tupac and Biggie was killed. But now as older, I'm almost 40. You know, these were kids, rich kids, but they were kids. He wanted justice just like you did for these young men. He had 1 year left of retirement. And then just because he said, according to him, he could not, you know, investigate this the way he wanted to investigate this case. He quits the LAPD before 1 year of his retirement. You know, I had to think to myself, like, wow, you felt this strongly about something to give up, you know, your retirement, give up your life. I mean, overall, what's your opinion on Russell Poole as a detective, as a human being? I know you never met him, but just everything you heard.
Well, you know, all I can do is offer an outside opinion about him as a person because I never did. I didn't know him personally, but I've spoken to a lot of people that were very close to him, including his coworkers and partners. And so, you know, I got a pretty good idea of you know, of who he was as far as his professional life. And, you know, I think he just lost his objectivity when it came to this case. I understand that he's a really good investigator and handled other cases and did a great job on them. But, you know, with 19 years on the job and he's got this massive amount of pressure, him and other guys, you know, because he had a senior partner who was actually the lead investigator on the case. So Poole was the junior partner of this team. And, you know, he developed this theory and guys were telling him like, hey, Russ, there's a lot of holes here, man. Just don't go too far with, you know, this because there's a lot of reason not to accept these, you know, this theory. And he didn't. He got stubborn. He dug in his heels and continued to pursue that. And then he was so adamant that he left the job with 19 years on, 1 year prior to qualifying from a lifelong pension. So that also kind of leans you like, okay, what is there something more going on than just bad judgment? Maybe there's other issues. His brother had walked out the front door of a house and was never seen again. And that's potentially some mental health issues that maybe bled over into the genetic, makeup of Russell Poole. Severe alcoholism. He was in trouble at work at the time he quit for, just conduct unbecoming, which is, a general statement about, some breach of policy when you're on the job. But that's it. The guy just, I think he made a bad call. He should never have walked away from the job. And I think if he had stayed there, and then he was in a position to continue to hear other voices and continue to hear from other investigators and look at other evidence, then maybe he wouldn't have gone down these rabbit holes. But once he walked away, it was hard to recover from that.
It's just heartbreaking due to the fact it's just like your task force. Two different theories, if you will. I don't really consider you and what your task force, what you and your task force prove is a theory. I honestly, God, believe that that's exactly what happened. However, you have your task force and you got Russell Poole, who really cared enough about what happened to these young men and wanted the murder to be solved. And, for that, he should be he should be, I don't want to say honored, but, say, hey, look,
Yeah, he believed in what he was doing. He truly believed, and it's okay. But there's also accountability, because if you're wrong, then what you're essentially doing is falsely accusing people of heinous crimes. So you have to be very, very careful. You have to know for sure. You have to have the proof and the evidence before you go out there and start making these claims, because otherwise you're falsely accusing people. And that's the dark side of what happened with Russell. You got, guys like Amir Muhammad being blamed for a murder that they had nothing to do with.
Yeah, I saw that in the documentary. I thought that was funny when the guy from prison knocks on his door and he's like, "Who are you?" I don't know. Last question about the show, which I would recommend everybody go to Netflix right now. It's a 10-part series. It's a great show. Your task force. You have one character in the show that was kind of wasn't much of a team player. In real life, did you have that?
We did. That individual was a combination of several people, because obviously we had like 16 people in our task force at one time. And so the producers knew that, hey, we've got to build this around a central cast of 4 or 5 guys. We can't have 15 different characters in this show. It'd just be, uncontrollable. So guys like Darren Dupree were obviously real people in real life. But that guy that played the African-American detective from the sheriff's department, he was a combination of different people. But certainly that particular guy was not a team player. And one of the guys that character was built on, I should say. And so there was some truth behind that, but that was a combination of people built into one.
As a team leader, how did you have to deal with those types of personalities?
It's the nature of being in any job. You deal with different personalities, different commitments, different approaches, different ideas, and you just have to try to all work together, because you're all ultimately trying to accomplish the same objective. But there's personality conflicts. There's always going to be personality conflicts, and you get along with some people great. Like me and Darren Dupree were like brothers. And then me and this other guy, we just didn't see eye to eye. So you just kind of work around those issues.
It wasn't Detective Kelly in the documentary, was it?
Oh, no. Kelly Cooper, the original investigator on Biggie's case. I love that guy. Kelly is a great detective, and probably he should have kept control of that case. Because once it went to robbery, homicide, and some older white guys that really didn't give a about, this music genre, and the whole gang type of thing. I don't know that they were best equipped to handle that case. I think Kelly Cooper, because he's African American, he was actually Darren Dupree's partner early on. And those guys were in a better position to understand the subcultures of the individuals that they were investigating and trying to get to cooperate, the gang members and the music guys. And so I think Darren and Kelly probably would have been better off keeping that case than having to go to RHD and getting managed over there. That's my personal opinion.
Well, let's get on everybody's favorite character, Keefe D. He's America's favorite gangster right now. Keefe D has stated Puff Daddy hired him to take care of Suge Knight and, if so, Tupac for a sum of $1 million. I'm no lawyer. I've never claimed to be smart, but that's a crime. What I take from this situation is I saw a little clip. I don't listen to the Breakfast Club, but I saw a little clip where that stupid host, Jermaine the God or whatever his name is, looked up Puff Daddy, said, "What do you think about this Greg Kading theory?" And Puff Daddy had a chance to answer the question, and he said, I'm not going to talk about negative stuff. And of course, Jermaine the guy was like, yeah, Puffy, I love you. I don't believe you either. And it's funny to me because if somebody lied on me, I'm going to be right then and there. I'm going to like, hey, no. Greg Kading's lying. Greg, but Puffy won't talk about it. And of course, he's not suing you. So that tells me there's something's going on. Why haven't they looked into this?
Well, we all have. I mean, we looked into it. We listened to Keefe D's version of events. We validated them to the extent that we could. And, of course, Puffy's a smart guy. And, Keefe D's confession comes over 10 years after the fact. And by then, Puffy Combs has become a music icon and, a very, very wealthy, successful man. And he's smart enough to know not to talk himself into, a jail cell. And so when these claims are made against him, the smart move is to say, I'm not going to talk about it. Otherwise, you start opening doors that you may not be able to close again. I
mean, when that kind of say, hey, maybe something's up. I mean, Greg, what I'm trying to say is, to me, two people are dead. Mm-hmm. And I don't care how much money you got, if the stuff that you proved in this case is true, mm-hmm. Puff Daddy deserves a time in court. That's all. That's my whole point.
Yeah, I agree with you. Everybody should be held accountable for their sins, and and at least, but again, you're using your own moral fabric to evaluate this scenario. You're a person who recognizes there's dead people, and I need to be held accountable for any role I played in those situations. That not everybody's going to do that. Obviously, people are going to protect themselves because ultimately self-preservation is your instinctive move. But I agree with you, but I understand why he doesn't talk about it. It's just, right. That's the dilemma.
Is it true that you sat in your truck with Keefe D for a couple hours and tell him that, hey, look, I'm going to write a book? I mean, it's funny. In my head, you're just sitting in the truck with a gangster, a known shot caller, somebody who's murdered a lot of people. And you're like, hey, look, I'm going to write a book. I mean.
Yeah, so I knew where he lived, obviously, because that's where our first encounter with Keefe D was at his house when me and Darren went over there to let him know that, we had him dead to rights on this massive narcotic conspiracy. And that's what led to him getting a lawyer and doing a proffer agreement with us. But after I retired and was in the process of publishing the book, I was like, okay, you should know. And I did this with, with Teresa Swan too. said, hey, I'm going to put this book out there. You need to know that there might be some repercussions. I have a responsibility to let you know, because I'm not trying to get anybody hurt anywhere, even including Keefe D. And so I pulled up in front of his house. I'm in my truck. I waved him over from the garage. He came over, he sat in my car, and we were in there for 20 minutes, maybe not 2 hours. And I said, here's the deal. I'm publishing a book, and it's going to lay out everything that you confessed to and your role in Tupac's murder. And I'm just letting you know ahead of time, this is what's happening. He's like, I'm a gangster. I deal with it. That's PVD.
You know, so, being such a gangster, you would think he'll fix his teeth. That's just, I have no respect for the guy. I ain't gonna lie to you. I don't have no respect for the guy. He took somebody's life, and not only somebody's life, he took an icon's life. You know, I look back at Tupac's life because as a kid, I always thought Tupac was cool. You know, I was into his music. I had all his CDs. But grown man, he was a kid. He was 25 years old. You know, he was a confused kid at that. Very talented, great actor, great rapper. But you know, he wanted to be part of that thug life, and he got that opportunity, and it cost him his life. You know, with that said, you know, Puff Daddy can't go to jail, but Keefe D can. Right now, I've heard you say many times that, you know, what you offer him to, and what kind of agreement was it?
It's known as a proffer agreement. So it's not immunity. People get these things confused, that a proffer agreement and immunity are the same thing. They're not. A proffer agreement is simply that he's basically got his Fifth Amendment rights, and that he's going to sit down, disclose information. And the agreement is that if you tell us anything that is untrue, then you're not going to get any consideration on these pending charges, which was his big drug case. However, if you do sit down and cooperate and tell us what you know, then we will take into consideration these pending charges. And that's exactly what happened. He's like, okay, here's what happened. We had nothing to do with Biggie. You know, I think Suge probably had something to do with Biggie. But I can tell you about what happened in Las Vegas. I can tell you about what happened to Tupac because I was involved in that. My nephew shot and killed him. I handed my nephew the gun. And it was all basically a response to the beatdown that his nephew had suffered earlier that evening at the hands of Suge Knight and Tupac and others. So simple street retaliation. And but you got to recognize these guys don't look at Tupac as, hey, this talented music icon. They look at Tupac as a guy that just stomped on one of their own, including Keefe D's nephew, Orlando. They have to retaliate because their whole reputation is everything in a gang. You can't be and let somebody stomp on you in public and then not come back and deal with it, because then you're just a punk. And that's not how they're going to roll. So
wow,
that's that.
Well, that's that. Oh. But you know, but here's the kicker. Mm-hmm. You know, he's going on interviews. You said this on Valuetainment. You said this on Violet TV. He's going on interviews. He's confessing. It was an A&E special you was a part of. I think it was more for this guy. He was a civil rights lawyer or something. I guess he just wanted to make a show, basically take what you did and try to make it his own. I thought it was stupid. With that said, I hope you got a payday out of that, because
it wasn't very well done. And I'm not sure. Some of these things I always regret that I participated in it all. But I wasn't really proud of that particular production. But Keefe D has gone and publicly confessed. He's got his book. He wrote a book. He's gone on BET, or I think it was Gangster Chronicles, or not the Gangster Chronicles. It's Death Row Chronicles, I think was the name of the 2-part documentary. And he confessed. Well, those are not protected statements.
No.
So he can potentially be charged. But what you have to understand now is that you've got a scenario where Keefe D is the defendant in a murder case, and the only witness against him is himself. It becomes a very problematic and impractical prosecution. It's very difficult to say, all right, Keefe D, you're being charged with murder. Now get up there and testify against yourself.
But as a layman, Mr. Kading, you know, I'm a layman. I have no law enforcement, background. only law enforcement I got is as a correction officer and as a private investigator. And you and me both know private investigating is not real law enforcement.
Right.
But you confess to a murder. If I go out there right now and confess to a murder, I'm going to prison. And I say,
Well,
of course, if there's proof. I'm sorry?
Well, if you committed a murder, because you can confess to a murder that you didn't do.
Well, yeah, but he's confessing to a murder that he did. And that brings me to a very interesting question. In your documentary, a gentleman named by the name Andre, in your documentary, it was stated that he was going around Compton and talking about how he shot Tupac.
Everybody in the car was bragging about it. The driver, Terrence Brown, Southside Crip, he was telling people that he shot Tupac. Right. DeAndre Smith, who was in the back seat with Orlando Anderson, he was claiming that he, busted on Tupac. And, and Keefe D's telling them all to keep their mouths shut because they're not doing themselves any favors by bragging about it. But again, these are young, dumb kids that live in a neighborhood where their reputation is everything. So, yeah, all three of them were bragging about being involved in the murder.
Well, with that said, I have a little theory. A kid from Alabama just comes up with this little theory. Could it have been possible that Keefe D said Orlando Anderson killed Tupac just because he's dead? Well, my point is this. It's so easy to say the dead man killed someone than say, I don't know, myself. So how did you ever come to Detective Dupree, Detective Kelly, did you ever come to the conclusion that maybe Keefe D was the actual murderer?
No, we didn't. For several reasons. One is that Keefe D is within that group of four people that were in the Cadillac. He's like the shot caller guy. He's not going to be sitting in the back seat. He's going to be in the front seat. And we all know that the shooting came from the back seat. And Keefe D also has got a situation where if we find out that he's lied about anything, then his whole proffer is out the window. He does himself no favors by lying about this. He actually hurts himself if he lies about it. So there's that, situation. He's got to tell the truth, the positioning of the people in the car, and of course, not a single witness of anybody ever says that Keefe D was the shooter. We had a lot of witnesses saying that Orlando was the shooter, like hearsay witnesses, people from the neighborhood, but never Keefe. Keefe was never thought to have been the shooter. So you got all those things considered.
I'm right. He did get in the car with a bunch of busters or whatever the hell.
Yes. So
and I'm making a joke. If you watch the documentary, first thing, I was in the car with a bunch of busters. I went into Cadillac. I mean, I was like, man, I'm sorry. I didn't like the mother. Excuse my language. And this may be one of those shows you regret doing, but it was just one of those things where I saw this and I was sitting there like, why are these people? What is going on in Las Vegas right now? You got a gentleman right now confessing to a murder. What more do you want? I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I'm a layman, but if this was a Perry Mason episode, this guy would be in jail right now. But I know this is reality, but
reality. And unfortunately, you've got, the information came way, way, way after the fact. If they had this information back when DeAndre was still alive or Orlando was still alive, or even T. Brown, who ended up dying shortly after this. They just needed more information. They needed more evidence in order to pursue charges. And right now, our evidence was a guy testifying, essentially against himself.
What's your relationship with the rap community? Like people like Snoop Dogg, people that work at Bad Boy?
I don't have a relationship with any of them. Not that I wouldn't. I'd love to sit down with Snoop, chop it up. I would love to sit down with Dr. Dre and just talk about things that we might have in common. But of course, that's a different world. That's not the world I come from or that I live in. So there's no natural reason for us be crossing paths. But yeah, I feel like people that appreciate the hard work that went into the case, and and respect the conclusions that we have, I think I'm generally recognized in good favor with the rap community.
Mm-hmm.
I became good friends with Mob James, of course, from Death Row Records, and one of the Mob Pyru founders. Him and I are super close, but I don't consider him from the rap community.
Right. It's just so funny to me. Like, everybody knew this was to be true. You said in the documentary that you'll call family members of Tupac, you'll call family members of Notorious B.I.G, and they say, you tell them what happened. They say, oh, we already knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And
certainly that was the case with Tupac. When I talked to his aunt, and I was trying to get a hold of Afeni, Tupac's mom, and they were like, yeah, we appreciate what you did, but we've already formed these same conclusions. Afeni always believed that Orlando Anderson was the shooter of her son. And so I'm just telling them what they already knew, which doesn't have a whole lot of value.
Hell, I believed it. It didn't take, the woman sued him. And not only that, I'm not saying I'm from the streets. I did grow up on 20th Street. That was pretty tough. But other than that, when you get jumped, there was no doubt in my mind that was the guy who killed Tupac.
It's common sense. Yeah, it is. It's just a logical conclusion. You got the motive and the meaning.
And so my next question to you is, where is Tupac now and how's he doing?
Evidently in Cuba, living large.
Okay. Well, with that said, what's next for you, Mr. Kading?
I continue to work. I got a pretty thriving PI business, and then I'm continually working in these creative projects. I'm getting ready to do a podcast of my own, and a couple of podcasts actually, which I'm really looking forward to, because that's fun stuff. It's not work. But that's about it, man. Raising, living with my wife and traveling and raising a 30-year-old kid. And, he just bought a house yesterday, so we're in the process of moving in today. But that's it. That's my life.
It's time to go, kid.
Well, he's been out forever. He's a Marine, or he's a veteran, and then college graduate, and has a job as an insurance salesman. So he's good to go.
Okay, I hear you. But listen, I'm humbled that you took this interview.
Pleasure.
The Murder Rap is a great documentary. I suggest everybody go on YouTube right now, buy the documentary. Go on Netflix, watch Unsolved. This man, he did something that a lot of people wanted to be done. He solved the murder of Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. He didn't mean to. And the cool thing about this was, you didn't mean to go out there and solve the Tupac murder. Your job was to solve the Biggie murder.
That was my job. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Orlando Anderson, who killed Tupac, and Poochie, who killed Biggie Smalls, can't see their day in court. But maybe one day, Suge Knight can see his day in court, even though he's in prison already. And P. Diddy, see his day in court, and Keefe D will see his day in court. I'm hoping. You said it's probably never going to happen, but I'm hoping that somebody in Las Vegas can do something and maybe make something work. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I tell you what I think would be the appropriate action, because I think that they should make an arrest. They won't be able to prosecute him, but at least you've made the arrest. You've put the responsibility now on the district attorney's office. You've done your job as a cop. And then if the district attorney office says we just can't pursue criminal prosecution against this guy, you've still made your arrest, and then you clear the case. And so that this doesn't need, nor should it, go down in history as a unsolved case. Las Vegas should absolutely determine this to be a solved case and clear that up for history's sake. but that's just not how they're rolling right now.
Well, they need to pick up the ball and roll it because, quite frankly, I got a personal challenge right now to Puff Daddy that I know is watching. I'm sorry, that's a joke. Listen, if you're a real man like you claim to be, stand up to these accusations. Do what you need to do because, quite frankly, these are serious accusations. You probably was BSing. You probably was talking at you. But these people took it seriously, and the man died because of it. With that said, Greg Kading, it was an honor. It was a privilege. I thank you humbly for coming on this show. I woke up very early just to talk to you because this was an important interview. I want you to stay on the line. Everybody else, this was the one and only Greg Kading. I'll see you next Sunday.
Hey, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. So when you're talking to somebody from Alabama and you say roll Tide, right? Is it Roll Tide? I know that's a reference to the Crimson Tide. It's one of the two football teams in Alabama that are you're either on. Is it Auburn or Bama? Right? Is that the two main football teams in college?
Well, no, not necessarily. See, Alabama is the football team of the state. And Auburn is, they're like the little sister.
Okay. So, but when you say Roll Tide, that's just something you do in Alabama,
majority of the people say Roll Tide. And then, okay, I'm cut it straight. There's War Eagle, which is Auburn, and there's Roll Tide, which is Alabama. But, right now, Alabama is the king of college football. So everybody wants to be on top. I want to tell you a little story. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was working Superstorm Sandy as an insurance adjuster, and I was coming home. I was driving through Washington, D.C. I said, I'm never going to ever get to come back to Washington, D.C. I'm going to stop, take some pictures, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I had an Alabama fleece on, and I had an All-State cap on and an Alabama fleece, but I was walking. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., it's a lot of different places you can park. It's very hard. I was walking. I went to the Lincoln Memorial. At the park about 200 yards away, I took a picture of the White House because you couldn't just go on the street. Anyway, while I was walking, everybody was like, Roll Tide. Because during this time, that ESPN commercial just came out where everybody was saying Roll Tide. So they saw me and they were like, Roll Tide. And I was like, Roll Tide. And then they started giggling like, I said Roll Tide. But see, here in Alabama, that's just common. You see somebody with an Alabama hat on, you see somebody with an Alabama shirt on, you just say Roll Tide. And then if you see somebody with an Auburn shirt on or an Auburn cap on, you slap them in the face.
Okay, no. I'll just say Roll Tide. I'm good with that. I don't want to get slapped back.